Champignon.
Château.
Croissant.
Saperlipopette.
Dégringolade.
Anticonstitutionnellement.
300 million people speak French as their native tongue. The language of love and of Molière is spoken on all 5 continents and is the official language in nearly 30 nations, including France, Canada, and many countries in Africa. As more than 80 states and governments from around the world come together in Armenia for La Francophonie Summit this week, today we're celebrating Francophonia. And for this fete, I'm joined by the writer and expert of all things Francophone Stephen Clarke. Now, Stephen, you've written more than a dozen books about French culture, language and history, including A Year in the Merde, Talk to the Snail, and your latest is The French Revolution and What Went Wrong. What is Francophonia and why do we need to celebrate it every 2 years?
I don't know if it's so much a celebration. It's, I mean, Francophonia, obviously, it doesn't sound good in English because you've got like phony in the middle, but there's nothing phony about it. Francophonia is the French-speaking world, or it was the French-speaking world. You know, now it's a kind of a commonwealth of nations. They've got one more nation, the British Commonwealth. I'm sure there's a competition going on there. It's just about, I think it's probably more economic than linguistic, you know, because there are nations like the Emirates want to come in, Saudi Arabia wants to come in, you know, that's not for linguistic reasons. They don't want to start, you know, studying Baudelaire or anything like that. You know, that's economic. So I think the word celebration isn't there. It's a kind of coming together, and probably, you know, in between drinking champagne and eating foie gras, people get asked, do you want to buy a nuclear power station or a Renault car? You know, I think it's that kind of get-together. The French are really, really good at industry and selling their industry. And I'm pretty sure that's you know, it's all about that.
Well, the French artist Edith Piaf and Molière, but also the Canadian singer Celine Dion and the Senegalese musician Youssou N'Dour have all used French for creative expression. Linguists say French is one of the most influential languages. They also say it's the language of the future and could one day be the most spoken language in the world.
There are 274 million French speakers in the world. For France's Emmanuel Macron, speaking French opens doors in an increasingly globalized world. But what many don't realise is that there are more French speakers in Africa than Europe. In 2014, there were 150 million Francophones in Africa, but less than 100 million in Europe. There's another 20 million from the Americas and the Caribbean, followed by 2.5 million in the Middle East and Asia. Finally, around 1 million are living in the South Pacific. By 2050, Africa could account for 85% of the Francophone world. But according to the International Organisation for la Francophonie, those numbers could change depending on how the organisation's 54 member states choose to reinforce the language's teaching. With a potential for 700 million speakers, French could become the most widely spoken language in the world. But for now, it ranks 5th worldwide, behind Arabic, English, Spanish and Mandarin, with 848 million speakers.
What do you reckon, Stephen, the most spoken language in the world?
I'm not so sure. And there's also a big problem with the way French is taught, because when you speak to people here in Paris who are learning French, they come here to learn French, they want to sort of chat people up or go to restaurants or stuff, and they get grammar hammered into their head for a year, you know, get your past subjunctive right or you're not allowed to say anything. French teaching methods are a bit old-fashioned for it to suddenly dominate the whole world, and you know that's the advantage of English. I mean, it's not my English, your English that dominates the world. It's this kind of Esperanto English where you can stick words together and people understand each other. And English is just very good at taking a noun and making it into a verb, and for people understanding things without necessarily conjugating verbs and remembering masculine and feminine and all those very difficult French things. French has got a lot of obstacles. And also the French don't want to modernise their language.
Well, they've actually got something protecting the French language,
yeah,
the Académie Française,
exactly.
That was created in the 17th century or something like that.
And officially, a word does not exist until the Académie have accepted it. And I did some interviews at the Académie a few years ago, and they were still debating whether sushi was a real word or not. You know, sushi, a word used by half the French population doesn't exist because they don't like it. You know, they've still got that attitude, so they've got a long way to go before it takes the world over the world.
Well, President Macron has called the award-winning Franco-Moroccan writer Leila Slimani his personal representative for Francophonia. Here she is talking about why French is so important.
French is cool too. Speaking French isn't old-fashioned. Thanks to the French language, I can speak to somebody in Togo, Brazil, China, and Morocco. I think that's a really important thing, particularly in this day and age when there's a danger of xenophobia. So many people around the world want to build walls, barricade culture. They say there's a clash of civilizations. Francophonia says the exact opposite.
Leila Slimani's book won the Encore Prize for Lullaby. It came out in English at the start of this year. Many of your books, you write them in English and for English people. But your latest one was actually written for French people, Elizabeth II, Queen of Laughs. When you read it in English, when you read it in French after it had been translated, what was the biggest difference?
It was slightly longer because French is a longer language. Because, again, like I was saying before, in English, if you want to say, get out of here, he stuttered. You've got this word stutter, which you can use as a verb, and, it's a very, very good one. But actually, it's a bad example. You could probably do it in French. But there are things where you have to, in French, explain, like, movement. You can't, you can't exactly tumble out of a room or something like that, because you'd have to say they fell out of the room tumbling or something similar like that. And France is more complicated and it's less adaptable. So it's a great language. It's a very poetic language. It's a beautiful sounding language. And it's true, the French are really good at promoting it and protecting French culture. I wish the Brits would do the same for, English. Because if you're a French, surrealist poet, you can find yourself doing a tour of Mongolia, reading your French poetry to a bunch of confused schoolchildren, and getting paid for it, and maybe selling some books. In Britain, you're on your own. It's real sort of old-fashioned Anglo-Saxon, get out there and do it yourself culture. The French are really good, I think, at protecting their culture and sponsoring their culture in a way that countries like Britain could learn a lot from.
French is difficult to figure out and people do still get tripped up. Here's the presenter of our French Connections show, Florence Villeminot, testing the pronunciation talents of some tourists in Paris.
I'm here on the Pont des Arts in the very heart of Paris to explore just how difficult the French language is to pronounce. Let's take a look. Can you guys pronounce these words for us?
That's easy.
So,
Louis. Louis.
Louis is pretty good. Louis, which means him. And Louis.
Is the name.
Like Louis. How do you pronounce the first two? Well, the first word and then the second word.
I don't know French, but
Yux.
Oil. This one is very tricky.
Arreux.
Close. Yeah. It's œil. Œil.
I don't know what you said. It's wrong.
All right.
What does that mean?
Well, it's like one eye.
Oh, one eye.
Œil. Yeah, and two eyes.
Like one
les
ear?
yeux.
Stephen, do you have a favourite French word?
A favourite French word? I do. I mean, I write novels with the word merde in the title, and merde is a great word because it can be, it can be good, it can be bad.
It's a rude word for poo.
Yeah.
For people watching.
But it can also, actors say it to each other before they go on stage, so it can be a good thing as well.
Do you have a favourite French expression?
I do. It's a bit rude, but I can't really describe it because I've heard young French people describing indifference in a very picturesque way, which would probably get the programme banned from television. But so I'll give you another one, which is there's this new French word that people have started saying a lot, which is French have a way of in slang of back slang, turning around, and people say that things are relou, which is there's the French lourd, which means heavy, but they've turned it around, relou. And it's a great word because it just means anything a bit shady. C'est relou. And it's a wonderful way of just expressing doubt about everything, which the French love to do. They doubt everything. They question everything. So it kind of sums up French mentality.
What's the funniest misunderstanding you've had?
I mean, I've had loads. I love the way that, if you're not very careful, especially as an English speaker, instead of saying merci beaucoup, thank you very much, you can say merci beaucoup, thank you, beautiful arse. So you can be thanking someone and complimenting them in a very sexist way at the same time.
Do you have a favourite French song and can you sing it?
A favourite French song? I mean, I love, Johnny Hallyday, who died not long ago. He's got this great sort of bellowing voice, and people made fun of him because they said he's like a French Elvis or anything. But I think he was just a wonderful expression of this French. The French say that lots of French people say they don't like American culture; it's taking over the world. Whereas Johnny Hallyday was the kind of fake American. He loved Harley Davidsons and rock and roll, but he was Belgian, but he was incredibly French. And there's this one song of his called Que je t'aime. I love you, que je t'aime, that. And he kind of bellowed it out in this sort of que je t'aime, que je t'aime, que je t'aime, like that. And it's just so incredibly French, but at the same time, he kind of mispronounced words in an American way as well. So it's kind of a French person trying to speak English but speaking French at the same time. It's just so confused that I love it.
Another Belgian singer, actually, who we're commemorating the 40th anniversary of his death this week, is Jacques Brel. Mm-hmm. Why was he a good ambassador of the French language?
He wrote that song, Ne me quitte pas, which people know, even though it's, in fact, when you listen to the words, it's very beautiful. He says to this woman, I'll offer you droplets of rain which come from a country where it doesn't rain. It's kind of beautiful, but at the same time, it's horribly desperate. He also starts saying, I'll be your dog's shadow. He's going to follow her about, It's a bit weird. But it's a beautiful sounding song. And, it took French all over the world, so why not?
Stephen, thank you. We're going to leave you with Jacques Brel. Remember our website. We're also on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. There's more news coming up on France 24 after this.
Dans le port d'Amsterdam, il y a des marins qui dorment comme des oriflammes le long des berges mornes. Une valse à 3 temps, ça prend encore le temps de s'appeler des tours du côté de l'amour. Quand on n'a que l'amour à offrir à ceux-là, dont l'unique combat, je me cacherai là. À te regarder danser et sourire et à t'écouter chanter.